common misstep that many make after discovering the potency of active recall and spaced repetition. The temptation to dive headfirst into creating flashcards for everything. And I'll admit, I was guilty of this when I first started out. The allure of memorizing a slew of facts without truly grasping the underlying concepts can be overwhelming. However, this approach can prove detrimental to the learning process, leaving you with a vast assortment of isolated facts and no comprehensive understanding or connections to the bigger picture. But it doesn't end there. You'll likely find yourself repeatedly revisiting the same flashcards because they weren't effectively learned in the first place. This can result in a frustrating, monotonous, and ultimately unproductive study routine. It might even lead to burnout, dropout, or worst of all, fallout. The key to retaining information for the long haul lies in having a clear and concise comprehension of the material and organizing it in relation to other relevant knowledge. Before we jump into the world of Anki and dive headlong into active recall questions, it's crucial to acquaint ourselves with the concept of encoding and, more importantly, mastering the art of encoding new information effectively. Understanding the workings of encoding can yield substantial long-term memory benefits and save you considerable time that would otherwise be spent relearning or forgetting information. To achieve this, we must engage in higher order thinking and deep processing when tackling new material. We'll delve deeper into these strategies in future videos. For now, let's continue our exploration of the fascinating realm of memory. Information processing system. Why active recall and spaced repetition aren't enough. A dive into memory and cognitive load. You don't need to be a cognitive psychologist to learn effectively, but having a basic understanding of how memory works can significantly enhance your learning journey. In this video, we'll explore the information processing system and delve into cognitive load theory. These concepts will provide essential context for optimizing active recall and spaced repetition techniques in your studies. Let's begin by examining the information processing system, which likens the brain to a computer. Just like computers receive and process information for immediate use or future reference, our brains follow a similar pattern. When sensory information enters our minds through our senses, it first lands in our sensory memory, usually in the form of auditory or visual input. However, the sensory memory is exceedingly brief, lasting only a few seconds at most. Our brains swiftly filter out irrelevant details because we're bombarded with sensory input constantly. For instance, if you're deeply engrossed in a Netflix binge, you're unlikely to notice or remember sounds from outside your room. Such information gets discarded much like a 2-month-old salad mix. Yet, when something in the storyline of the show piques your interest, it enters your working memory and you instinctively click next episode at the end of the show because it's relevant to you. You're paying attention to this information because you've chosen to focus on it. However, we live in one of the most distracting eras in history, but I'll save that discussion for another time. Information that captures our attention or conscious thought moves from sensory memory to our working memory. Often referred to as short-term memory, although the terms are not technically the same, they will be used interchangeably here. The working memory can hold around 7 plus or minus 2 items or chunks of information and last roughly 15 to 30 seconds. Some research suggests these numbers can vary depending on the type of information being learned. Rehearsal is a key process to retain information in the working memory. The longer we can hold information there, the better the chances it'll transition into our long-term memory. The goal is to move crucial information from short-term to long-term memory through encoding. Unlike the short-lived sensory and working memory, the long-term memory theoretically has an unlimited capacity. Psychology presents memory as an information processing system with 3 fundamental functions: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding involves receiving, processing, organizing, and combining information with prior knowledge before it moves into the long-term memory. Storage creates a permanent record of encoded information, while retrieval is the act of bringing stored information back into awareness in response to a cue, as in active recall during exams or discussions with friends. Once information is encoded and stored in the long-term memory, it needs to be retrieved to prevent it from being forgotten, meaning the pathways to the stored information may degrade. Hermann Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve highlights the importance of spaced repetition and active recall in slowing down this process, allowing us to retain information for extended periods. Retrieval is crucial because we need to bring information back into our working memory for it to be of any use. Active recall and spaced repetition strengthen the connections between the long-term memory and working memory, making information more accessible for use. Remember, intelligence is closely linked to what we can remember, but there's more to it. Retrieval is significantly impacted by how information is initially encoded, not just how it's recalled or retrieved. To get the most out of active recall and spaced repetition, we must consider the limitations of our working memory, which differs from the vast capacity of the long-term memory. This brings us to the intriguing realm of cognitive load theory. In 1988, John Sweller introduced cognitive load theory, a concept that highlights the limited capacity of our working memory. Sweller's theory underscores the importance of avoiding information overload in instructional methods to enhance the learning process. But what does this all mean? Especially when your cognitive load is likely soaring as we speak. Let me simplify it for you. Cognitive load refers to the amount of information our working memory can handle at any given moment. Cognitive load theory explores how our working memory functions when we encounter new information. To put it plainly, when a learning situation bombards us with too much data simultaneously, it leads to cognitive overload. This overload can hinder or even prevent effective learning. Psychologists posit that our long-term memory consists of mental structures or patterns of thought known as schema. These schemas enable us to reorganize, group, and connect new information with existing knowledge or experiences. Now, if we want to become more efficient at learning, especially in our studies, it's crucial to recognize the limitations of our working memory. This awareness guides our study strategies effectively. To harness the benefits of this knowledge in our studies, we must delve into the three primary types of cognitive load and learn how to optimize each one. Understanding these differences allows us to approach our studies with purpose and with an emphasis on effective encoding. These three primary types of cognitive load are intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. Let's start by diving into intrinsic cognitive load. Intrinsic cognitive load refers to the inherent complexity of a specific topic, regardless of how it is presented or taught. Essentially, certain subjects naturally demand more working memory capacity due to their inherent intricacy. Simpler topics, on the other hand, require minimal processing capacity and take up less space in our short-term memory. To illustrate this, consider the contrast between solving a complex calculus problem, which places a heavy intrinsic cognitive load, and performing a simple mathematical calculation like 2 + 2 = 4. You can probably feel the difference just by thinking about these two examples. Now, it is important to note that we can't alter the intrinsic cognitive load of a particular topic itself. However, we have control over how we approach it. By breaking down complex subjects into smaller, more manageable parts, we can reduce the space they occupy in our limited working memory. Let's take learning a second language as an example. Language learning involves an exceptionally high level of element interactivity. Element interactivity refers to a concept's complexity due to the interconnectedness of its elements, which depends on the type of information and the learner's prior knowledge, which essentially means it arises from the number of elements that must be processed simultaneously in working memory and cannot be learned independently. Imagine being an absolute beginner in a foreign language. If you listen to native speakers conversing, you'll likely struggle to comprehend anything they're saying. Even if you catch a word or two, it won't help you much because you lack the prior knowledge or schemas in that language. This is why language learning starts with the basics, like the alphabet and simple words, then progresses to simple phrases. Simplification is key to building a scaffolding for understanding. As you progress, you'll notice that your working memory can handle more words without cognitive overload. Eventually, the language becomes second nature and you can learn new information in the language effortlessly. That's precisely why we start with the basics, like the alphabet, followed by elementary words and nouns. Before delving into the vast expanse of a language, it's essential to distill it to its foundational elements, setting up a framework upon which to scaffold our understanding. Given our limited bandwidth for absorbing new information, it's crucial to commence with the basics and gradually transition to more intricate layers. However, Herein lies a potential pitfall for flashcards, which is becoming entangled in rote memorization and solely focusing on isolated facts without connecting them to the broader context. For example, mastering 10,000 words on flashcards through active recall and spaced repetition is an accomplishment, but without discerning these words in sentences and grasping their contextual nuances, their true essence remains unknown to the learner. Ultimately, our goal is to diminish the intrinsic cognitive load during the learning process by segmenting information into more manageable portions. This alteration in approach not only simplifies element interactivity, but also facilitates our understanding of intricate subjects based on these fundamental knowledge blocks. Let's delve into extraneous cognitive load, which encompasses anything not directly related to the information you're learning. From an instructional standpoint, this often arises from poorly designed teaching materials, such as cluttered or irrelevant content. Any superfluous details introduced during the learning process hijack the learner's cognitive capacity, diverting it away from the crucial information. Now, I want to emphasize that teachers are doing their best, and I don't intend to place the burden solely on them. There are various teaching techniques to reduce extraneous cognitive load, but let's focus on what students could do to alleviate it. As we're aware, there exists a bottleneck between sensory memory and long-term memory due to the limited capacity of working memory. Consequently, much of the information doesn't make its way across. Therefore, our study strategies must be optimized to amplify intrinsic and germane cognitive loads while studying and minimize extraneous load. Since we can't always control how information is presented to us, our goal should be to eliminate extraneous cognitive load when studying independently. Extraneous load can take the form of distractions like keeping your cell phone nearby and giving in to the constant allure of notifications. It might involve texting every 10 minutes, listening to music with lyrics, leaving a Netflix show running in the background, or being in a noisy environment where someone interrupts you every other minute, disrupting your study flow. Regardless of the form it takes, when you're consuming new information, it's imperative to eliminate any sources of distraction or information that compete with the other two types of cognitive load. Basically, this is a way of emphasizing the importance of staying focused and intentional when you're studying your material. Anything unrelated to the learning objective constitutes extraneous cognitive load and should be minimized whenever possible. Germane cognitive load. Finally, let's explore germane cognitive load. Germane load pertains to the mental resources dedicated to acquiring and automating schemata within long-term memory. In simpler terms, it represents the cognitive load used to connect new information to existing knowledge or schema in your long-term memory. Think of it as the part of your mind that experiences those aha moments, or the feelings of, I understand it now. As mentioned earlier, cognitive load theory draws upon schema theory to explain how individuals acquire and store information by integrating lower-level schemata with higher-level ones. This theory assumes that our working memory resources are limited, and processing and retaining information consume a portion of these resources. Once a certain amount of information is stored within a single schema, it can be maintained in working memory at a reduced cognitive cost. Cognitive load theory treats cognitive load as a multifaceted concept encompassing various sources that generate specific cognitive load. To illustrate this concept, let's consider the scenario of a new nursing student with no prior healthcare experience shadowing an RN on a med-surg unit. On their first clinical shift, the nurse provides the student with thorough explanations for each procedure throughout the day, offering reasons behind each action. Moreover, this RN assigns tasks within the student's existing knowledge. However, on the next clinical day, a different nurse places the student at a patient's bedside and immediately requests them to retrieve various medical supplies from the supply closet and perform unknown tasks. This second nurse's demands lead to an extreme cognitive overload because the student has no prior knowledge or experience to relate that information to. The goal is to maximize schema creation by connecting new information to existing concepts. This approach helps our brains encode efficiently and enhances our ability to recall information from these schemata. In conclusion, we've delved into cognitive load theory and explored why relying solely on active recall and spaced repetition may not be the most effective approach to learning. While our brains possess virtually limitless storage capacity for information, Optimizing the learning process requires a deeper understanding of how our cognitive load operates. By embracing cognitive load theory principles, we can fine-tune our cognitive load management, reducing intrinsic cognitive load. We've learned the importance of breaking down complex topics into more digestible chunks. Although this doesn't reduce the inherent complexity of certain subjects, it does make them more manageable for our working memory. Minimizing extraneous load. By recognizing the distractions and irrelevant details that compete for our cognitive resources, we can actively work to eliminate them. This allows us to stay focused and intentional when studying, directing our attention towards the core learning objectives. Maximizing germane load. We've emphasized the value of linking new information to existing knowledge or schema in long-term memory. This process not only fosters aha moments, but also streamlines encoding and retrieval, making information more accessible over time. By applying these concepts, we can encode information more effectively, ensuring its retention for longer periods and facilitating easier retrieval when needed. In the upcoming video, we will dive deeper into encoding techniques and explore various active learning methods that enhance the encoding process, which will ultimately lead to more successful and efficient learning experiences.